told you that waking up at 2 a.m. to, hustle on your new business or staying up until dawn to master a new skill is actually physically aging your brain?
Yeah, making you mathematically less likely to succeed.
Exactly. I mean, imagine for a second that you are standing at the base of this massive mountain.
Right, like a huge life transition.
Yeah, maybe you're pivoting to a totally new career, or you just stepped into a super demanding leadership role. Or perhaps you're just trying to master this highly complex skill that feels completely out of your wheelhouse.
And you have the ambition. You really do.
You have the drive. But you're just flooded, right? Yeah. Absolutely inundated with information.
Oh, the feed is just a nonstop stream.
Endless self-help advice, those punchy motivational clips, articles on how to optimize literally every second of your day.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
Right. And to keep up with all this, to climb this mountain, you start making sacrifices. You cut into your sleep to grind just a little bit more.
You try to push through the fog.
But here is the incredibly frustrating part. Instead of rocketing up the mountain, you hit a massive wall.
You feel completely stuck.
Stuck, exhausted all the time. Your thinking feels totally rigid, and you find yourself suddenly clashing with your colleagues, your friends, everyone.
You're putting in maximum effort for zero momentum.
Yeah, it's like flooring the gas pedal while the car is just buried up to the axles in deep mud. I mean, I see this constantly. I've lived it myself. It's maddening. Why does this happen to so many of us?
Well, it's maddening because the very first reaction most people have when they hit that wall is to blame themselves.
Oh, totally. They think it's a lack of willpower.
Exactly. They tell themselves, they just aren't disciplined enough or they don't want it badly enough. But the reality is far more mechanical than that.
How so?
Because this paralysis isn't a failure of character. It's a systemic biological failure. The person you're describing is essentially trying to run high-level advanced software on a machine where the hardware is actively melting down.
A melted motherboard. Wow.
Yeah, you simply cannot force high-level cognitive adaptability when the underlying biological and psychological systems are just collapsing.
Collapsing under the weight of sleep deprivation and information overload.
Right. It's a structural impossibility.
Okay, so we're dealing with a melted motherboard, not a lack of ambition. That really changes the entire perspective.
It does, which is why in our exploration today, we are looking at 3 completely anonymous, highly researched documents.
Yes, spanning sleep science, cognitive psychology, and behavioral strategy. We are going to extract the core mechanisms from these materials to help you, the listener, untangle this exact feeling.
We need to figure out how to rebuild that foundation from the cellular level all the way up to how you execute your daily tasks.
Right, and to do that, we have to start with the hardware, because if we don't fix the biological reality first, well, all these behavioral strategies are totally useless.
Completely useless. And the documents approach this through what's called the biopsychosocial model of health.
The biopsychosocial model, that's a mouthful.
It is, but it's crucial. Historically, medicine and performance science looked at humans like simple combustion engines.
Like if your knee hurts, you just fix the knee.
Right. Or if you're tired, you just pour caffeine into the system. But this model completely rejects that isolated view. It argues that your biology, your psychological state, and your social environment are inextricably linked.
So they feed into each other.
Exactly, in a continuous feedback loop.
Right, so we can't just isolate the fact that our overwhelmed person is tired. We have to look at how that exhaustion bleeds into literally everything else.
Precisely. Think about how the loop works. You miss a few hours of sleep, that's the biological component.
Okay.
Because you're biologically depleted, your baseline anxiety spikes, and your focus shatters. That's the psychological component.
And you snap at someone.
Yes. Because you're anxious and unfocused, you lose your temper and snap at a coworker during a meeting. That is the social component.
Oh, man. I've been there.
We all have. Now, because your social environment is suddenly hostile and stressful, your psychological anxiety increases even further.
Which means you can't sleep that night either.
Exactly. Your heart rate remains elevated at night, totally destroying your ability to get biological sleep. It's a vicious, accelerating cycle.
Which really brings us to a massive misconception that triggers this entire cycle. I mean, I certainly believe this for most of my 20s.
The illusion of unconsciousness.
Yeah. We treat sleep like an off switch, like we're just powering down the machine for the night and leaving it dormant.
Which is fundamentally incorrect and honestly physically dangerous. If you are truly unconscious, medically speaking, you're in a coma.
Or under heavy anesthesia.
Right. Your brain activity drops to this flat, minimal baseline. Your health is severely compromised. Sleep, on the other hand, is an intensely active state.
Metabolically demanding, the sources.
Highly demanding. If we measure the brain waves of a sleeping person using an EEG, the waking brain looks like chaotic static.
But when you sleep,
The brain generates these massive, sweeping, highly organized electrical waves. It is an active process that requires an immense amount of energy.
I like to compare the sleeping brain to a massive corporate office building in a major city.
I love that analogy. Walk me through it.
Well, from the outside, at say 3 a.m., the lights are off, the doors are locked, and it looks completely dead.
It looks like an off switch.
Exactly. But if you actually go inside, the night shift cleaning crew is frantically vacuuming the floors and emptying the trash.
The IT department is running massive server updates.
Right, updates that they couldn't possibly run during the day without crashing the whole system. And the filing clerks are just sorting through mountains of paperwork.
It is a hive of necessary, intense activity.
But here's what I don't totally understand about that mechanism. If the brain is so incredibly active while we sleep, why do we have to be physically paralyzed?
That's a great question.
Like, why are we totally cut off from our senses, just lying there helpless in the dark?
It's the ultimate evolutionary trade-off. In order for the brain to perform all of that critical internal maintenance, it has to completely sever its connection to the outside world.
So it just cuts the feeds?
Basically, it deliberately shuts down visual and olfactory inputs. It blocks the outside world so it can focus entirely on the inside world.
Oh, I see.
And furthermore, during REM sleep, which is the phase where we dream most vividly, the brain essentially paralyzes the voluntary muscles in your body.
It's called REM atonia, right?
Yes, exactly, REM atonia. If the brain didn't paralyze you, you would physically act out the violent or active scenarios in your dreams.
Which would be terrifying.
And dangerous. From an evolutionary standpoint, you'd likely end up walking off a cliff or attracting a predator. So the brain trades external vulnerability for internal repair.
Okay, so what exactly is that internal repair doing? Because our sources introduce this incredible metaphor of the cognitive recycling yard.
Yes, which perfectly illustrates your filing clerk analogy.
Let's walk through the actual mechanics of this recycling yard.
So think of your waking day as an aggressive accumulation of data. From the moment you wake up, your brain is bombarded with sensory inputs.
Every email you read, every conversation.
The layout of the grocery store, the specific syntax of that new coding language you're trying to learn.
Yeah.
All of it is dumped into a temporary holding area in the brain.
The hippocampus.
Primarily the hippocampus, yes.
Yeah.
And it's a massive, disorganized container, just a chaotic jumble of short-term information.
A giant pile of unsorted data.
Exactly. And the brain has finite physical storage capacity in that short-term area. It literally cannot hold on to all of it, or it would be entirely overwhelmed.
You wouldn't be able to learn anything new the next day.
Right. So only during deep, slow-wave sleep can the brain step into that recycling yard and begin the massive sorting process.
What does that actually look like biologically?
The brain actively reviews the contents of the hippocampus. It decides what is completely useless. The color of a passing car on your commute, or a mundane small talk interaction.
And it just throws it away.
It literally prunes those synaptic connections away. It deletes them to free up physical space. Then it identifies the crucial information, the real learning.
And that's what it keeps.
Yes. It physically transfers it from the short-term storage of the hippocampus to the permanent storage of the neocortex.
Wow. So this is basically the save button.
It is the biological mechanism of saving. And this entire sorting, discarding, and transferring process only functions when you are asleep.
So if you're the listener right now and you're trying to learn a highly difficult new skill, say you're trying to master a complex guitar chord.
Or memorizing vocabulary for a new language.
Right, or preparing a dense presentation for the board, here's the mechanical reality. Practice it right before you go to bed.
Yes, because the brain takes that specific file, that sequence of movements or words, and writes it to the hard drive while you sleep.
But if you stay up all night trying to cram the information,
then the learning process isn't just slowed down. It is fundamentally broken. The save function is disabled.
you're doing all the work, but you're forcing the computer to crash before it can actually write the data to the disk.
That is the perfect way to look at it. Studies consistently show that practicing a skill and then sleeping on it result in a measurable mathematical leap in proficiency the very next morning.
Without even doing any additional practice.
None. The brain actually rehearses the patterns at high speed while you sleep.
That's incredible.
Conversely, lacking sufficient sleep disrupts these learning processes entirely. In children, sleep disturbances directly and negatively impact their school grades.
Especially when the tasks demand deep cognitive processing, right?
Exactly, associative thinking rather than just simple rote recall.
Which really exposes this massive, pervasive cultural lie we've all been sold. Hustle culture.
Oh, absolutely.
We've been conditioned by social media to believe that sleeping is a sign of weakness or laziness. Our overwhelmed striver genuinely believes that to beat the competition, they need to be awake at 2 a.m. grinding away.
It is a toxic ideology that completely ignores human physiology. When you actually look at the data, and when you look at the habits of the most highly successful people on the planet, the sleep is for the weak narrative just completely falls apart.
I mean, the sources mention a tremendously famous e-commerce billionaire, one of the wealthiest individuals in the world, managing incomprehensible logistics.
And he insists on a strict 8 hours of sleep.
Not just as a luxury, right?
No, as a rigid requirement to maintain his decision-making quality. There's also a legendary software pioneer who openly states he requires at least 7 hours of sleep.
Just to maintain his creativity and problem-solving abilities.
Yes.
But why do they need so much? I mean, if anyone could afford to just hire people to do the heavy lifting, it's them.
Well, because the kind of work they do, high-level strategic planning, complex software architecture, predicting market trends, it requires vast associating memory networks.
Meaning what, exactly?
It requires the brain to connect seemingly unrelated pieces of information to form a novel insight. And that specific type of complex associative linking almost exclusively happens during the late stages of REM sleep.
Which you only get if you sleep a full 7 to 8 hours.
Right. Because REM is heavily concentrated at the very end of the night. If you cut your sleep to 5 hours, you don't just lose 30% of your sleep.
What do you lose?
You lose almost 80% of your REM sleep.
Yeah.
You literally rob yourself of the biological mechanism that creates innovation.
Wow. 80%. But people are always looking for a hack, you know? They want to cheat the biology.
They do. And that leads us to the myth of polyphasic sleep.
Oh, yeah. We have all heard of these extreme routines online, like the Uberman sleep schedule.
It's everywhere.
The idea is that you take 6 20-minute naps spread evenly throughout the 24-hour day, completely eliminating the need for a solid block of nighttime sleep.
It totals 2 hours of sleep a day.
It sounds like the ultimate productivity superpower.
It sounds like a superpower,
Yeah.
but biologically it is a catastrophic failure. Yes. The Uberman schedule and similar extreme polyphasic routines are completely incompatible with human physiology. The brain's sleep architecture operates in roughly 90-minute cycles.
Moving from light sleep down to deep and back up.
Exactly, moving from light sleep down into deep slow-wave sleep and back up into REM sleep. You simply cannot compress a 90-minute biological cycle into a 20-minute nap.
So what happens to people who try it?
People who try the Uberman schedule inevitably suffer severe cognitive and physical deterioration. They are completely depriving themselves of deep, restorative, slow-wave sleep.
But wait, what about the rumors regarding elite athletes? I've seen articles claiming that certain world-renowned athletes, like a specific global soccer superstar, mentioned in the research.
Yeah, that he sleeps in tiny 90-minute bursts exclusively throughout the day.
Right. Is that true?
This is a profound and dangerous misunderstanding of the data. Elite athletes require immense amounts of physical recovery. What they're actually doing is taking strategic daytime power naps to supplement their standard nighttime sleep.
To supplement it, not replace it.
Exactly. They are sleeping 8 or 9 hours a night and then adding a nap during the day to further aid muscle recovery and reduce sleep pressure.
Okay, let's talk about the mechanics of that sleep pressure then. Because when done right, a daytime nap can be an incredible tool. It clears a bit of that recycling yard midday.
It is a great tool, provided you keep it to about 20 to 30 minutes.
What happens if you go longer?
If you sleep longer than that during the day, you risk entering deep, slow-wave sleep. If you wake up in the middle of that deep stage, you experience severe sleep inertia.
That heavy, groggy feeling where you feel worse than before you napped.
Yes, it's awful. However, there is a very strict biological rule attached to daytime napping. If you suffer from nighttime insomnia, or if you consistently struggle to fall asleep at night, you must avoid daytime napping entirely.
Well, why? I mean, if I'm exhausted from not sleeping at night, shouldn't I grab sleep wherever I can get it?
No, because of a chemical called adenosine.
Adenosine.
Yes. From the moment you wake up in the morning, adenosine begins to build up in your brain. It creates sleep pressure.
Okay, so like a gauge filling up.
Right. The longer you're awake, the more adenosine accumulates and the heavier that pressure becomes, eventually forcing you to sleep at night. Sleep is the only process that clears adenosine away.
So if you have insomnia,
If you suffer from insomnia, you desperately need that sleep pressure to build to a massive peak by 10 p.m. so it can overpower your anxiety and force you to sleep.
I see.
If you take a nap at 2 p.m., you act like a pressure release valve. You bleed off that adenosine. By the time 10 p.m. rolls around, you don't have enough biological pressure to fall asleep, and your insomnia continues.
You sabotage your own biological rhythm.
Exactly.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, let's look at how this biological hardware failure affects our emotional state, because this is where the overwhelmed striver is really feeling the pain in their daily life. Let's talk about the mechanics of resilience.
Right. Resilience is essentially our psychological immune system. It's our capacity to navigate difficult, stressful phases of life, absorb the shocks, and maintain our baseline function.
Without suffering long-term impairment.
Exactly.
The sources offer this brilliant visual concept for resilience, the Teflon pan.
Yes. Such a good visualization.
When you are highly resilient, stress slides off you like oil on a non-stick Teflon pan. An angry email from a client slides right off. A delayed flight slides off. You just handle it.
But sleep is the literal raw material that the brain uses to manufacture that Teflon coating.
Right. When you are sleep deprived, the Teflon coating is just stripped away. The pan is just exposed raw metal.
By now, every single stressful interaction, every minor inconvenience, sticks to the metal and burns.
You snap at your colleagues, you lose your temper with your family, your emotional regulation is completely compromised.
That is a very accurate representation of the neurology. To explain the actual mechanism, the amygdala is the emotional reactive center of the brain.
It's the gas pedal for fear and anger.
Yes. And the prefrontal cortex, located right behind your forehead, is the logical, rational control center. It acts as the brakes.
Okay, gas pedal and brakes.
When you are fully rested, there is a strong, highly connected neural pathway between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. The logic center can easily apply the brakes to your emotional reactions.
But when you're tired.
Brain imaging studies show that severe sleep deprivation physically disrupts this connective pathway. The prefrontal cortex is essentially taken offline. The brakes are cut.
Wow. So you aren't just in a bad mood. Your brain physically cannot stop itself from overreacting.
Exactly. The amygdala becomes hyperreactive, up to 60% more responsive to negative stimuli.
60%? That's huge.
It is. The texts highlight an incredible 10-year longitudinal study to demonstrate this. The researchers originally designed this massive decade-long study to look at the maximum physical performance of elite athletes over time.
So they were tracking sprint times, things like that.
Right. They assumed that as sleep varied, physical metrics like sprint times or lifting capacity would be the very first to deteriorate.
But that wasn't the case.
Not at all. What this immense body of data inadvertently revealed was that while physical performance does eventually drop with sleep deprivation, the cognitive and emotional drop-off happens much earlier.
And is vastly steeper, I imagine.
Yes. The researchers were shocked.
Yeah.
Before a runner lost a fraction of a second on their sprint time, their eloquence, their spatial concentration, and critically, their emotional regulation plummeted.
So they couldn't articulate complex strategies.
No, they couldn't focus on the field, and they couldn't handle the stress of competition.
So how do we measure this daily? How does the listener know if their hardware is failing before they reach that breaking point?
The texts provide a highly practical morning metric.
Right. Think of grading how you feel the moment you wake up on a scale from 1 to 6.
Yes. A grade of 1 or 2 means you wake up naturally, feeling physically fresh, cognitively energized, and generally in a good mood.
Without needing a blaring alarm to shock you out of a deep sleep cycle.
Exactly. If you are consistently waking up at a 3, 4, 5, or 6, feeling sluggish, irritable, physically heavy, and desperate to go back to sleep, your brain is actively accumulating damage.
And we use the word damage literally here.
We do. The sources detail a fascinating MRI study that examined the biological age of the central nervous system.
What were they looking for?
The researchers wanted to see what missing a single night of sleep actually does to the physical structure of the brain.
Just one night.
Just one night. They demonstrated that a single isolated night of total sleep deprivation causes acute changes in brain morphology.
Morphology meaning the physical shape and structure.
Right. Specifically regarding fluid distribution and tissue volume. These changes make the central nervous system look measurably older on a scan.
That is terrifying.
It is. The brain physically mimics the structural appearance of advanced aging after just one night of missed sleep.
One night.
Though the good news is that this specific acute aging is generally reversible with proper recovery sleep.
Okay, phew.
But it profoundly underscores the sheer physiological toll that lacking rest takes on your hardware. Every time you pull an all-nighter to hustle, you are momentarily aging your brain.
You cannot outwork or out-hustle biological reality.
You really can't.
Okay, so the foundation is clear. Step one for our overwhelmed striver isn't downloading a new productivity app or drinking more coffee.
No.
It is getting 7 to 8 hours of solid sleep to reconnect the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala and clear the cognitive recycling yard.
That's the mandatory first step.
But let's look at the next phase. Let's say our striver listens to this. They commit, they fix the hardware, the biology is stable.
Okay.
But they get to work, and they are still clashing with their boss. They are still failing to pivot their career. They still feel fundamentally stuck. Why?
Because while the hardware is fixed, the mental software is rigid.
They are trying to navigate a brand new, constantly changing environment using a map from 20 years ago.
Which brings us to the mental engine, cognitive flexibility and thinking systems.
Let's get into it.
To understand why people get stuck in rigid patterns, we have to look at the physical mechanism of learning, which is neuroplasticity.
Right.
For a long time, the prevailing scientific belief was that the brain became hardwired and physically fixed after a certain age, usually in early adulthood.
Like it just sets like concrete.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we now know that is entirely false. Neuroplasticity is the brain's physical ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout your entire life. It has no expiration date.
You know, I've always struggled with the word software when talking about the brain because it implies something invisible and digital. But neuroplasticity is highly physical, isn't it?
Oh, very much so.
It's less like downloading an update and more like carving a riverbed.
That is a far superior analogy. Think of a thought or a behavior as water flowing across a landscape. The first time you do something new, like trying to learn a new language or adopting a new management style, it is like a tiny trickle of water trying to find its way through the dirt.
It's slow, inefficient, and difficult.
But the more you repeat that behavior, the more water flows, and it physically carves a deeper trench into the landscape. Eventually, it becomes a massive, deep riverbed.
That is a hardwired habit.
Yes. The water naturally rushes there because it is the path of least resistance.
And cognitive flexibility is the ability to divert that water when the environment changes.
Precisely. Cognitive flexibility is the behavioral manifestation of neuroplasticity. It is the capacity to inhibit your prepotent response.
Meaning the ability to stop the water from flowing down that deep, comfortable riverbed.
Exactly. You stop it and instead force it to carve a new path because the situation demands it. It is the ability to adapt to unexpected, novel situations rather than rigidly fighting the new reality.
This becomes incredibly visceral during major life transitions.
Well, absolutely.
Graduating from university and entering the workforce, moving to a new country and experiencing culture shock, or shifting family dynamics like becoming a parent.
Those are the ultimate tests.
They really are. They force us to abandon our old riverbeds. They force us to prioritize differently, to listen to different viewpoints, and to manage our emotions in unfamiliar territory.
And the sources point out that a critical mechanism for this flexibility is present moment awareness. Mindfulness.
Why is that so critical mechanically?
Because if you are constantly living in the past, mourning how the river used to flow, or paralyzed by dreading the future, your executive function is entirely occupied. You literally do not have the cognitive bandwidth to be flexible in the present.
So flexibility requires your prefrontal cortex to be anchored in the now, assessing the actual variables in front of you.
Yes. And this brings us to one of the most powerful diagnostic frameworks in the material. The four thinking systems.
I really found this fascinating. This framework decodes how people inherently process reality, right?
It does. Because of genetics, early environment, and the specific riverbeds we have carved over our lifetimes, we all develop a dominant way of interpreting the world.
We use a mixture of these four systems, but almost everyone defaults to one or two dominant systems under stress.
Let's explore these four systems in detail, because understanding this mechanism completely changes how you view workplace friction.
Yeah, walk us through them.
The first is the methodical thinking system. These individuals are highly organized, step-by-step thinkers.
They love spreadsheets.
They do. They're intensely focused on clear goals, structured planning, risk mitigation, and predictability. They want to know the exact process before they take a single step.
Okay, got it. What's the second?
The second is the action system. These people are driven by progress, movement, and tangible results.
They just want to go.
Yes, they have an overwhelming biological need to be doing something constantly. They value speed and execution over perfect planning, and they get terribly frustrated by endless deliberation.
Right. And the third?
The third is the idea system. These are your divergent creative thinkers. They are fascinated by concepts, theories, innovation, and the big picture.
The brainstorming type.
Exactly. They love disruptive change and are always looking for the next massive breakthrough, but, and here's the catch, they often get terribly bored with the routine execution of their own ideas.
Of course. And the fourth system?
The fourth is the human system. These individuals are focused on empathy, collaboration, active listening, and social bonds.
The glue of the team.
Yes. They prioritize team well-being, psychological safety, and relationships over cold efficiency or abstract theories.
Now, I need to challenge this concept a bit.
Go ahead.
We just spent all this time talking about neuroplasticity, cognitive flexibility, and not being rigid. But this framework sounds like we are just taking all the complex, messy human beings in a workplace and shoving them into one of four rigid, stereotypical boxes.
I completely get why you'd say that.
Doesn't that contradict the entire idea of being flexible?
That is the exact trap most people fall into when they encounter this framework. But consider the alternative. Without this framework, you assume everyone thinks exactly like you do.
Which is the ultimate form of rigidity.
Exactly. Understanding these four systems does not trap you in a box. It gives you the specific mechanical tools to step out of your default box.
Oh, I see.
True cognitive flexibility means identifying your own dominant riverbed. Let's say you are naturally an ideas person and recognizing when the current environment actually demands a methodical approach.
So you use your prefrontal cortex to consciously inhibit your natural urge to brainstorm.
Yes, and you force yourself to adopt a structured, step-by-step approach temporarily to solve the problem at hand.
Ah, so the systems aren't permanent labels. They are translation tools. They are different languages.
Exactly. Let's look at a practical scenario. Say you are an ideas person, you love big concepts. Your boss, however, is a hardcore action person. They only care about speed and results.
Okay.
If you go into their office to pitch a new project, what happens if you speak your own language?
Oh, it would be a disaster. I would walk in and start talking about the theoretical paradigm shift, the innovative technology we could use, the grand 5-year vision for the industry.
And you'd be totally energized.
I would be completely energized, but my boss, the action person, would be sitting there tapping their pen, getting increasingly agitated.
Thinking, when is this actually going to be done? How much does it cost? And what is the immediate return?
Right. We are speaking completely different languages, and that creates massive interpersonal friction. I would leave thinking my boss is narrow-minded, and my boss would leave thinking I'm totally impractical.
And that friction causes the social stress that feeds back into the biopsychosocial loop, ruining your sleep.
But if you possess cognitive flexibility,
You identify your colleague's system. You realize your boss is an action thinker. So instead of leading with the grand theory, you adapt your language.
you walk in and say, here is the timeline, here are the immediate deliverables for Friday, and here is the expected revenue.
Yes. You instantly bypass the resistance because you are communicating in the language their brain naturally prefers. You haven't changed your ultimate goal. You have just changed the delivery mechanism.
That reframes so much workplace conflict.
It really does.
So, applying this flexibility to our overwhelmed striver who is actively trying to master new skills, how should they actually be learning? They are reading all these books, but the water isn't carving the new riverbed.
The sources detail a very specific continuous learning model to fix this. The 70.20.10.
70.20.10. So break that down for us.
This model explains the neurological reality of how adults actually acquire and retain new complex behaviors.
Ah.
When striving to learn something new, formal education is actually the least effective mechanism.
Really? The least effective.
Yes, the model suggests that only 10% of your learning should be formal. Reading textbooks, sitting in lectures, or watching online courses.
Just 10%?
Because reading a book only activates the visual and language processing centers of the brain. It is like drawing a map of a river. It doesn't actually carve the dirt.
Oh, wow. Okay. What about the 20%?
20% of your learning should be social. Learning through mentorship, peer feedback, and teamwork. This activates the social and emotional centers of the brain, adding context.
And the 70%?
70% of your learning must be experiential. It must come from hands-on practice, trial and error, and most importantly, failing in real-world scenarios.
Why is failing so critical to the learning process?
Because failure triggers an acute stress response. It releases neuromodulators like adrenaline and dopamine, which act like a chemical spotlight in the brain.
They say pay attention to this.
Exactly. They tell the nervous system, we just made a mistake that caused pain or embarrassment. We must physically rewire the brain to ensure we don't make this mistake again.
Experiential learning activates the motor cortex, the spatial reasoning centers, and the emotional centers all at once.
It is a full brain workout. It is the flood of water that actually carves the new riverbed.
So the striver who is just passively reading endless self-help books and watching tutorials is stuck in that 10% zone, wondering why they aren't mastering the skill.
They need to get into the 70% and actually start doing it. And there's a piece of mechanical advice here regarding how to study that 10% effectively. Spaced repetition.
Ah, yes. Spaced repetition is the key to maximizing the cognitive recycling yard we discussed earlier.
It involves leaving deliberate time gaps, days, or even weeks between your study sessions.
Instead of cramming for 8 hours in one day.
Correct. When you cram, the hippocampus becomes full and it simply stops accepting new information. But if you study for an hour and then sleep, the hippocampus clears that information into the neocortex.
And then a few days later, you study again.
Yes. This forces the brain to retrieve the memory from the neocortex, which tells the brain this information is being accessed repeatedly. We need to thicken the myelin sheath around these specific neural pathways to make retrieval faster.
But those software upgrades depend entirely on the hardware maintenance of sleep.
They absolutely do.
Okay, so let's take stock of our person. They are rested. The hardware is fixed. They understand neuroplasticity. They are identifying the thinking systems of their team, and they are translating their ideas to reduce friction.
Their mental software is upgraded.
Right. Now we move to the final piece, the daily execution. Because having a rested brain and a flexible mindset is completely useless if you sit on your couch and don't actually do anything with it today.
Exactly.
How do they overcome the paralysis of the modern information flood and actually execute?
Well, the modern information flood has created a very specific, highly addictive psychological trap. We are bombarded with incredible amounts of inspiring content designed to hack our dopamine systems.
I have to admit, I fall into this trap constantly.
Most people do.
I will sit on the couch with my phone and just scroll through endless short clips of highly successful people giving profound life advice. I will read deep philosophical quotes, and my brain releases this rush of dopamine.
Right, you feel productive.
I feel this massive, fake sense of progress, like I am fundamentally changing my life and becoming a better person just by agreeing with a video. But in reality, I am remaining completely passive. I haven't moved an inch off the couch. I call it inspirational paralysis.
It is a brilliant term because it accurately describes the neurochemical illusion. Your brain gets the chemical reward of achievement without having to perform the actual metabolic work.
So what's the antidote?
The antidote to this paralysis is understanding the cumulative mechanical power of tiny daily discipline.
A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Or a single thought. But feeling inspired by that thought does not physically move you forward. It requires relentless, unglamorous, highly repetitive daily execution to manifest that thought into reality.
Because intensity, like a massive burst of motivation at 2 a.m., is fleeting. Consistency is what actually carves the riverbed.
Which brings us to a tactical mechanism for cutting through that paralysis, the Post-it note strategy.
This was such a great practical tool from the materials. If you are feeling overwhelmed by the sheer volume of advice and strategies you've consumed, the sources suggest a method of aggressive cognitive constraint.
You take a physical stack of sticky notes.
Right. You go through all the advice, the quotes, the grand strategies you've gathered, and write the best points down, one per note. Put them all on a wall. You might have 50 notes.
Then you force yourself to filter them.
You pull down the weakest ones until you have 20. Then filter again, ruthlessly, until only the absolute top 10 rules remain, the non-negotiables.
And then?
You take those 10 notes, stick them where you see them every day, and align your daily actions solely around those few principles. You throw the other 40 away.
The underlying mechanism here is the reduction of cognitive load. The psychological principle, known as Hicks' law, states that the time and effort it takes to make a decision increases exponentially with the number of options available.
So if you have 50 strategies you're trying to implement simultaneously,
your executive function is completely overwhelmed by the choices. You experience decision fatigue, and you naturally default to doing nothing.
By artificially constraining your focus to just 10 rules, you eliminate the cognitive overload.
You give your brain permission to completely ignore 90% of the noise, which frees up the massive amounts of energy required to execute violently on the remaining 10%.
And the reason this focused execution is so critical is tied to a profound concept explored in the texts. The idea that you are the architect of your reality.
Yes.
Now, that phrase sounds a bit mystical or like magical thinking, but it is deeply neurological, right?
Yeah.
The idea that our internal beliefs literally build the external world we experience.
It is not mystical at all. It is an observable physiological mechanism within the brain, specifically involving a network of neurons in the brainstem called the reticular activating system.
The RAS. How does the RAS work?
Think of the RAS as a highly strict bouncer at the door of a crowded nightclub.
Okay, I like this.
At any given second, your senses are bombarded with millions of bits of data sites, sounds, temperatures, peripheral movements. If your conscious brain tried to process all of that simultaneously, it would instantly overload and crash.
So the RAS acts as a filter.
It acts as a ruthless filter. It blocks out 99% of that sensory input and only allows information into your conscious awareness that it deems absolutely necessary for your survival.
Or information that aligns with your deeply held beliefs and focus.
Exactly.
So if I decide I want to buy a very specific vintage red car, suddenly I start seeing that exact red car everywhere on the highway.
Yes. Those red cars didn't magically appear because you thought about them. They were always there.
But previously, my RAS categorized them as irrelevant background noise and filtered them out.
The moment you made the red car a priority, you programmed your RAS to let that specific visual data through the door.
Wow.
Now, apply this mechanism to your goals. If you deeply believe that a goal is impossible, you program your RAS with that belief.
So your brain will subconsciously filter out any data that contradicts it.
It will actively highlight the obstacles, it will ignore potential solutions, and it will proactively gather evidence to justify your failure.
Because the brain prioritizes being correct over being successful.
It does. However, if you genuinely believe a goal is possible, you reprogram the bouncer. The RAS shifts its focus. It begins to scan your environment for opportunities, resources, and hidden doors that were always present.
But that you were literally blind to previously.
Yes.
You know, the famous early 20th century industrial pioneer sums this up perfectly. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you are right. The belief dictates the biological filter.
It really does.
So here is a mechanical challenge for the listener. Take a goal right now that you think is completely impossible. Ask yourself the question, what if it actually were possible?
And for just one single day, act as if success is 100% mathematically guaranteed.
Watch how your physical energy changes. Watch how the strategies you generate shift completely when the cognitive weight of fear is removed and your RAS starts scanning for solutions instead of excuses.
Acting as if is a highly effective cognitive behavioral tool.
Yeah.
It breaks the cycle of anticipatory anxiety.
And speaking of breaking cycles through physical action, the sources present a very specific, seemingly disconnected habit to build daily momentum.
Waking up at 5 a.m.
Right, waking up at 5 a.m. and engaging in rigorous physical exercise every day for 2 weeks. Okay, let's address the elephant in the room. The classic wake up at 5 a.m. advice.
I know, it sounds cliche.
Every hustle culture personality screams this on the internet. I've tried it, and I usually just end up exhausted, staring at the wall, and needing a nap by noon.
Right.
Why is this advice in a document that just spent pages explaining the absolute biological necessity of getting 8 hours of sleep? Are we contradicting the hardware rules?
It is a critical distinction, and it is where hustle culture fundamentally misinterprets the mechanism. The 5 a.m. wake-up, in this specific context, is absolutely not about sacrificing sleep.
The hardware rules are non-negotiable.
Totally non-negotiable. If you are going to wake up at 5 a.m., you must be asleep by 9 p.m. to get your required 8 hours. If you cannot go to sleep at 9 p.m., do not wake up at 5 a.m.
Okay, that clarifies that.
Furthermore, this advice is not actually about physical fitness, nor is it about having more hours in the day to work.
Then what is the psychological purpose of doing it?
It is entirely about manufacturing psychological momentum and self-efficacy. It is about proving to yourself through an undeniable, difficult physical action that you are in control of your biology.
Think about the mechanism. When the alarm goes off at 5 a.m., it is dark, the room is cold, and your bed is warm.
Your limbic system, the primitive part of your brain, screams at you to stay in bed.
Overriding that primal instinct, physically forcing your body out of bed, and completing a difficult physical task before the rest of the world is even awake, is a supreme act of executive control.
It sets a neurological precedent for the entire day. You have already won the first, hardest battle against your own weakness.
This builds what the text wonderfully describes as an inner airbag.
An inner airbag.
I completely understand that feeling. When you accomplish something difficult immediately, it changes your posture for the rest of the day. So when you get into the office and a major deal falls through or a client criticizes your work, it doesn't devastate you.
The psychological airbag deploys.
You subconsciously process the failure and think, well, that's a setback, but I already conquered my own biological impulses at 5 a.m. today, so I have the internal fortitude to handle this.
It creates a baseline of unshakable resilience. It creates empirical evidence of your own discipline.
And when you are facing those difficult choices throughout the day, whether it is getting out of bed at 5 a.m. or deciding whether to confront a difficult interpersonal issue at work, or choosing between doing the hard research or scrolling on your phone, the texts offer a brilliant cognitive framework to bypass your immediate impulses.
A tomorrow self framework.
This is crucial because when you are in the moment of making a choice, your present body is incredibly persuasive.
Oh, it is sending you all sorts of lazy chemical signals. It is saying, stay in bed, it feels good right now. Or don't have that difficult conversation with your boss, it will cause immediate anxiety.
You physically cannot trust your present feelings in those moments because they are heavily biased toward immediate comfort. So you bypass them by asking a simple question.
Will my tomorrow self thank me or pity me for the decision I am about to make right now?
The mechanism here is called psychological distancing, isn't it?
Yes. The limbic system is entirely focused on the present moment. It only cares about the next 5 minutes of comfort. The prefrontal cortex, however, has the unique human ability to simulate the future.
So by actively imagining a future version of yourself experiencing the consequences of your actions, you recruit the prefrontal cortex to overpower the short-term desires of the limbic system.
Your tomorrow self will never thank you for hitting the snooze button and rushing through the morning.
But they will always thank you for having the courage to endure the temporary discomfort of doing the hard work today.
It is a powerful hack for generating discipline when motivation vanishes.
So our striver is taking action. They are executing their 10 roles. But life isn't a controlled laboratory environment. They are going to hit massive, unexpected obstacles.
They absolutely will.
How do they navigate those without giving up? The text contrasts rigid goal setting with a concept called wayfinding.
Traditional goal setting can become a catastrophic trap if it is too rigid.
Like saying, I must reach this specific career peak by this exact date using this specific path.
Exactly. You create extreme tunnel vision. You suffer from inattentional blindness. If an obstacle, say an economic downturn or a massive technological shift, completely blocks that specific path, your rigid mindset perceives it as a total failure.
You freeze.
Wayfinding is a completely different mechanism. Wayfinding means you have a strong internal compass. You know the general direction you want to travel, say, north.
And you know the core values you refuse to compromise on the journey.
But you remain highly flexible regarding the specific path you take. If the road is blocked, you don't panic or despair. You adapt, you find a detour, you explore a side trail.
But you continuously keep heading north.
Right.
To illustrate the sheer power of wayfinding, the source shares an incredible, anonymized story about two struggling entrepreneurs back in 2007.
Oh, I love this story.
They were living in a major city, desperately trying to build a business, but they had completely run out of capital. They couldn't even pay their rent for the month.
This is a massive, seemingly insurmountable obstacle. The rigid thinker panics, perceives total failure, packs up, and moves back home.
But these two were wayfinders. They maintained their peripheral vision. They noticed a completely unrelated piece of data. A massive international design conference was happening in their city that week, and all the local hotels were completely sold out.
Thousands of attendees had nowhere to sleep.
So what did they do? They didn't have the millions of dollars required to build a new hotel. They took simple air mattresses, put them on the floor of their own apartment, and rented them out to the conference attendees, offering them a homemade breakfast in the morning.
They turned a devastating personal financial obstacle into a highly creative, infinitely scalable solution.
That eventually altered the trajectory of the entire hospitality industry. They didn't focus on the closed door of their empty bank account. They focused on the open door of market demand.
That is the ultimate manifestation of cognitive flexibility combined with relentless execution. They programmed the reticular activating system to look for survival opportunities, and it found one hidden in plain sight.
And there is one final, crucial element to executing this daily code, especially when your obstacles inevitably involve dealing with other people, and that is empathy.
Empathy, not just as a nice moral virtue, but as a hard strategic cognitive tool for success.
It goes back to the old proverb, walking 100 steps in another person's shoes to truly understand their perspective. But how is that a strategic tool?
In our highly polarized, fast-paced world, conflicts are almost exclusively viewed as zero-sum battles to be won. We want to crush the other side's argument with our logic.
Sure.
But true empathy means utilizing your prefrontal cortex to suspend your own ego and your own need to be right, just long enough to genuinely understand the origin of the other person's behavior.
Every single behavior, no matter how irrational it seems to you, has a history.
Every rigid stance someone takes is born out of their own experiences, their own thinking system, and their own specific fears.
If you can understand the mechanics of why your colleague is pushing back so hard on your idea, perhaps they are a methodical thinker who is deeply terrified of the unseen risks your idea's approach is introducing.
You stop seeing them as a malicious enemy.
You recognize they are just trying to protect the project in their own way.
You treat the conflict not as an annoyance to be defeated, but as a crucial opportunity to adapt, to translate your vision into their language of risk mitigation.
And to grow the idea into something vastly more robust. Well, we have covered an immense landscape of mechanisms today. Let's bring this all back to resolve the narrative of our overwhelmed striver standing at the base of that mountain, feeling their tires spinning in the deep mud. How did they finally gain traction and start climbing?
They didn't do it through one massive, heroic, exhausting leap of motivation.
They did it by systematically repairing the invisible architecture of their life. First, they respected their biological hardware. They stopped treating sleep like a luxury for the weak and started ruthlessly prioritizing those 8 hours.
Allowing their brain to enter the cognitive recycling yard, prune the useless synaptic connections, and permanently encode the new complex skills they were trying to learn.
They reconnected their logic center to their emotional center.
Second, they developed cognitive flexibility. They stopped forcing their old mental software onto new problems.
They recognized that neuroplasticity requires the discomfort of experiential learning.
They learned to identify the four thinking systems of the people around them. They learned how to strategically speak the language of action to their boss while still protecting their own ideas mindset.
Turning exhausting workplace friction into seamless collaboration.
And finally, they embraced the unglamorous micro-disciplines of daily execution.
They recognized the trap of inspirational paralysis and stopped scrolling. They constrained their cognitive load by filtering their life down to 10 non-negotiable rules on Post-it notes.
They programmed their reticular activating system to scan for solutions by acting as if success were possible.
They started waking up early to secure a physical victory before the day began, building that inner airbag of resilience.
They used the Tomorrow Self framework to bypass their lazy, immediate impulses.
And they navigated massive obstacles with the peripheral vision of a wayfinder.
If we synthesize the overarching mechanics of these diverse sources, it points to a profound truth about human nature. Human potential is genuinely limitless, but it absolutely cannot be hacked.
There are no shortcuts that bypass biology.
Real transformation requires a deep mechanical synergy. You must fiercely honor your biological limits and physiological needs.
You must continuously stretch your neurological plasticity by exposing yourself to new ideas, failing in the real world, and embracing uncomfortable perspectives.
And you must master the quiet, relentless consistency of daily action. You truly are the architect of your reality.
But you cannot manifest a building out of thin air. You have to lay the biological foundation and build it one physical brick at a time, day after day.
Day after day.
We've talked extensively about how your internal thoughts physically shape your external reality, and how the quality of your sleep fundamentally shapes the quality of your thoughts.
It's all connected.
So tonight, when you lie down in the dark, when the screens are finally off, the inputs are severed, and the world goes completely quiet, ask yourself, what old, rigid blueprint, what outdated riverbed is your brain going to recycle and prune away while you sleep, making room for the person you need to become tomorrow?